Benjamin Elijah Mays once said, "I believe everyone is born into the world to do something unique and distinctive." I have been fortunate enough to have opportunities that have allowed me to discover my unique and distinctive purpose. Unfortunately, every young person does not have that same experience. Building community, discussing the hard topics, challenging ideas, promoting HBCUs, and advocating for equal educational opportunities for all Americans. Dean Talk brings together various people, perspectives, and topics which are critical to the improvement of education and equality in America. Welcome to Dean Talk. Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. Happy mid-November. We are almost to Thanksgiving. It is hard to believe that this year is just zoomed by the way it has. But, we're doing what we need to do. Many of us are going back into situations where communities are quarantining or closing up shop. So we just always want to remain as positive as we can in these times and do all we can to just ensure that we are as normal as possible. We know we've discussed before that things will never really return to how they were, and that we are creating what will be our new normal moving forward. So I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. Before we start, I have a couple of announcements. First announcement, we are raising money for our scholarship fund. We're getting a lot of requests from students across the country who are having additional challenges this year due to COVID, due to parents losing jobs and other things. So consider giving to our scholarship fund. Every dollar helps. No donation is too small. And secondly, I want to encourage everyone to connect with me on my social media. That is Instagram, Facebook, our YouTube channel is up so that you can know what I'm doing. And if you would like to reach me, you can visit me on my website at rwaynewoodson.com. My schedule's there. You can contact me. You can see what initiatives are going on and where I'll be in the country. So I'm so excited this morning to have Dr. Lundy, who is from Wiley College, joining us. This is our first series in our mental health programs as we're looking and thinking about students who are preparing for finals, students, faculty, and staff who are preparing, for the holiday break. And this year is going to be different. I know I've talked to a lot of people that have said that they're not doing normal Thanksgivings this year, that they potentially will not be doing normal Christmas gatherings this year because of COVID-19. And so we want to make sure we discuss, how we ensure that our mental health is as stable as it can be. So I'm excited for our guest. I would now bring her on and then we will get going. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I am well and really excited to be here for today's very needed discussion. I think it says a lot about Dean Talk. It says a lot about you, Dr. Woodson, and the work that you're doing, that you thought this to be important. So I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you. So tell everybody a little bit about you.
Well, I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, and I identify as a clinical psychologist. That's probably one of the first things you'll hear me say about myself. I currently work as the Associate Vice President for Student Health Counseling and Wellness at Wiley College, where the student well-being is my primary focus. And I guess the last thing I'll tell you is I'm the self-care doc. Taking care of yourself emotionally is of primary importance. If we don't take care of ourselves, we can't be great administrators. We can't, in terms of our students can't make the impact in the world that they want to make. So as the self-care doc, it's my mission to make sure that people know what their personal self-care needs are and that they're doing that, they're taking care of that. And that is particularly important in the midst of a global pandemic.
And I'll be honest and transparent as always on my show. I have just started this self-care thing maybe like 2 years ago. Because I was the one, I would work like 16 hours a day and I'd sleep for like 2 hours. And there was like 8 years I never took a vacation.
Okay, 8 years. Wow. Okay, I can connect with that. In that, like, I honestly, even as the self-care doc, I integrate self-care in my day, and I'm intentional about that. We'll talk about it. But I think taking an official vacation, it's hard. Psychologically, we're programmed to produce and to keep going. So right. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
Even the year my brother got married, it was a destination wedding in Hawaii, and they were 6 hour time difference. So
Uh-huh.
there would be 9:30 meetings in here in Atlanta, in Augusta, where I was working. So I would be up at 3 or 3:30 in the morning so I could be on those calls. So it was just, I am doing better now. So I'm glad we
Okay.
talked about self-care.
So incremental progress, though. Yeah, I mean, I think with all of the things we'll talk about today, oftentimes we are thinking about the outcome and where we want to be at the end. But the truth is, it's the process, it's the journey along the way. And so you integrating those little things and just even being more aware of self care is the goal. So.
And you just hit our slogan on the head. It's called Excellence is a Process.
Yeah.
And so, I'm all for the process. So I'm so glad to have you on today. And, for everyone who's watching, what precipitated this conversation is that we've had a lot of students that have been reaching out to us because the things that would help balance their educational opportunities, they don't have access to. If they're not on campus, they don't have their normal peer group. And I mean, for those who don't know, there are many students that do not have the best home situations or get most of their services when they're on campus, not just housing, but meals and stability. And so with COVID-19 going on and many of our students not being here, that is why me and my team decided it was important for us to have this conversation. So what are some things that you are noticing? You are really hands-on, you are in the work, as Dr. Felton says, you are in the trenches in the vineyard. So what are some of the things that you're seeing with your students who are not on campus and how they're impacted by that in this current situation?
Yeah. So I guess first it would be good to let everybody know that for the fall semester, Wiley was completely engaged in remote online learning. So that meant that none of our students were on campus. So that meant everybody was at home. And to your point, they were in environments for some of them that weren't as healthy. So we tend to think about home being the place where safety is, but for many of our students, Wiley was what was safe for them. I give a shout out to our administration and to President Felton because when we went into the semester, recognizing that our students may not have all that they needed, we made sure that students had access to Wi-Fi, laptops, tablets, and we also had a food pantry. So food insecurity, you talked about that being very important. So some of those basic needs, we can't do any of the higher level emotional needs that we have if we don't have our basic needs met. And so making sure those things were taken care of. Once our students were at home, though, what I saw was what we would anticipate in seeing. We are in quarantine. We were in quarantine where you can't have physical contact with people other than those in your primary area. And so when you engage or when you're feeling isolated, when you are in periods of time where you are in heightened crisis or heightened awareness or heightened anxiety, what we noticed has been increased anxiety, depression. Those are kind of the key things that you would anticipate because of the separation. We are, particularly in communities of color and Black folks, we like to touch, connect. We're always on social media, but social media can be a tool for engagement or it can be a tool that kind of separates us, right? It's how we use it. And so initially, we weren't used to using social media as our primary or using the Zoom, internet. We weren't used to using that as our primary means of connection. And so for many of us, again, the low mood kind of rose. And particularly for our students who it happened like this. I remember us being in chapel on a Friday, and then that next Monday we were preparing for, helping students get home, and then that next week everything was different. We were in the house, lockdown, and so again, as you would expect, anxiety, depression. Unfortunately, also things that have risen have been increase in substance use and increase in the experience of domestic violence and sexual assault. Unfortunately, many of our students have been at home in spaces that haven't been safe. And so really it's been a challenge because I can't, to your point, I'm in the trenches. I go where the students are. So being able to touch them and to see them, that is really hard for me as an administrator. And I know at some point, I'm going to make sure we kind of integrate in. I talk about self-care. At some point, and I didn't make some changes to take care of me. then I wouldn't have been able to be as effective in taking care of them. So anxiety, depression, sexual assault, domestic violence, increase in substance use, and unfortunately, the last thing I would say, and I know it's hard when we talk about mental health, it gets so heavy. But the last thing I'll say is, unfortunately, increased rates of suicide have gone up, and that's just kind of generally, that's just what we're seeing, particularly at HBCUs. Though for our students, I think that anxiety piece has been real, and so I've been doing a lot of techniques around stress management, and really having to be creative about how I'm doing it. So,
You mentioned the pandemic and the separation. I'm an introvert by nature. And so it was just weird in this process. I realized how much the option of having things that I can do balances out my normal desire not to. So when I didn't have the option of going out or the option of doing things, it began to stress me out. And I told someone the other day that I was suffering from Zoom fatigue.
yeah,
Like
that's
there
a
was
real
one day.
that we joke about that, but that is real. There's research that indicates, after, really honestly, about 30 minutes, our attention span in normal settings, in not crisis settings, is about after 2 hours you check out, right? So we try to work for long spans of time. If you don't take a break, you're checked out. Well, that decreases in time in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of heightened anxiety. And so about 30 minutes, honestly, about 30 minutes is all we got. And so when we have days where you're on Zoom calls back to back to back, the fatigue sets in, and it's real. And I think it should be noted too, when I talked about kind of everything that we're experiencing, we are in a time of trauma. So we use the word pandemic, we kind of throw that out there. We talk about racial injustices. All of this is trauma. And we can break that down a little bit more, but the fatigue you're experiencing is in fact a trauma response.
Well, that's good to know because the person thought I was being funny, but I was being so serious because that morning I got on my first call at 8 and I didn't finish until like 9 o'clock that evening.
Yeah.
Because I have external clients and things, and they're not on calls all day.
Mm-hmm.
And that day I finished and I was like, I just have to go to bed. There's nothing else I can do today. And the next day I was exhausted.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. So you mentioned trauma. How is this current situation, and not just the pandemic, but we have the Black Lives Matter movement, and our students are impacted by that. They're seeing people just consistently murdered, and not just on TV, but on every social media outlet we look at.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you seeing that those things are impacting, our students, and not just students, but whether we want to admit it or not, administrators, faculty, and staff are being impacted as well?
Yeah, so at Wiley, what we've done during the pandemic is develop some innovative ways for outreach engagement and keeping the mental health, like individual counseling, group counseling, support groups, those kinds of things going. And so on Wednesdays, we have what's called Wellness Wednesdays, and on Thursday, we have what's called Let's Talk About It. And in those spaces, students are experiencing or sharing that they themselves are fatigued. So you just talked about fatigue. They talk about just a feeling of sadness around feeling that what can they do? A sense of powerlessness, right? Because we see it so much and they're inundated. And so really what we try to do in both of those spaces is to allow people to process it. So get it up and get it out. Connect with other people who are experiencing those same things, and then talk about strategies. Talk about how do we regain control. When we think about trauma, the first thing you want to do is kind of regain your sense of safety. Trauma tells us that we're not safe. We have to be on high alert. We're hyper vigilant. We're looking around, and as much as we're on social media or watching the news, I mean, literally, you can turn on. Has been traumatic for me, all of it has, but honestly, the election triggered me. And you couldn't turn, so really what we talk about in those spaces is how do you regain control? How do you reestablish some sense of safety, even though everything around you is telling you that you're not safe? And a lot of that is about creating routine. It's about setting boundaries. and engaging in self-care. Those three things: routine, boundaries, and self-care. And then as we have moved along, what I've given people is what I'm calling like the 3 Ps, and that's pause, play, and prepare. So we can talk about either of those. You tell me where you want to jump in, but really the trauma that the students have acknowledged has been the response that we would typically have: not feeling safe, not feeling power, having a sense of power and control. And what we then do is to say, how do we regain that control? And we process it, we talk it out. But I think it's important that we acknowledge, though, that, or we normalize it. I think you did that at the very beginning of our time today. You were like acknowledging that this isn't normal, and we have to continue to do that before we get to a place of being numb. When we're numb and we're not able to feel anything, then that can be a challenge. So someone else
Dr.
said they've
Robinson,
never
who's a
been on
friend of
a
mine, has just said he has never been on an official vacation, only trips with his students.
yeah.
And I mean, when I used to be choir director full time, that was the truth for me too, because, especially HBCUs, the choir director on our breaks where we would normally get a relief, are taking the choirs traveling.
Yeah.
And so it was a very unique experience. And then, of course, Dr. Hinton says good morning. So let's delve into your 3 Ps, Summer.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because that's very interesting. I've never really heard that concept before.
Well, it's a combination of our physiological need to reduce anxiety and to calm our central nervous system. I've talked about trauma being a heightened space or heightened state of awareness. Even now I'm doing it. It's so funny. I feel myself doing it. I am calming myself down. As I started our time together today, I was probably a little anxious myself. And the first P is about regulating your central nervous system and pausing. The first P is about pause. Pause can look different in terms of prayer. For many of us who have a faith-based experience, pause can also, though, just be about breathing. So I'll give you a tip that I do whenever I usually start a talk that I'm doing. And you can do this whenever you're engaging with your students, anyone who's watching, and when you are starting a presentation. I usually guide people through a breathing exercise because it calms my central nervous system. And it helps me to be present. So I usually start with a pause, because what happens is we're running from thing to thing to thing, and it causes us to feel heightened anxiety, and it's harder for us to think. So the pause looks like breathing. Like I said, the pause could look like prayer. Often I go through nature walk. So you talked the other day about the end of your day, you were all exhausted. Everything you had given it. I encourage you, though, before you crash, to pause, because what it allows you to do is kind of like expel some of that pent up energy. You had all this energy all day, and what we do is we go to bed with that, and then our shoulders, our body holds that. There's a book about trauma that says the body keeps score, and what it really is looking at is how. So if you've been working in a day, if you think about it, we're at our computers, our bodies are tense. And oftentimes we're not even breathing. So if we breathe, kind of relax those shoulders back. And then again, that sometimes I do those nature walks at the end of the day, or just it's like a pause, it's a separation.
And then, 2 things.
Yes.
I had for a while been taking one of my dogs out at night at the end of my day before I went upstairs.
Yeah.
And now that you mentioned it, I did notice that those were the nights in the last 3 weeks that I actually slept.
You slept better?
But last night, yesterday, I was so stressed out. And last night, I just went to bed. And it's so funny you were showing your shoulders, because I woke up this morning and it was just like I needed the muscle relax for something. So it's interesting that you mentioned that.
So breathing, prayer, nature walks, and being able to take naps is actually my last one that I'm going to say. So these are things, whatever can kind of help us to regulate. And what I do need to put in here as the self-care doc is that I always talk about self-care being, one, intentional, but also being personal. What works for you may not work for me, or it may work for me in some settings. The intentionality part is really important, because you have to say, So sometimes when we think about self-care, and so anybody watching, we usually think about it. One, is very gendered. We usually make it a woman thing, right? We want to get our nails done, our hair done. We think about it as a frivolous thing. And we often think about it from what we call more passive self-care. So passive self-care looks like I want to not think about something. I want to disengage. Active self-care, though, is about engaging and being intentional about what is it that I need in this moment. And that need is gonna change for us. At the end of your day, your long day, your body was physically tired, and so maybe that is what you needed. But sometimes what we do is we say we're gonna turn on Netflix, right? We're just gonna kind of zone out. When in reality, after you've had a day where your mental has been expended, you want to pour something back into your mental or your emotional. Okay, if you're emotionally depleted, the self-care that you're going to need is going to be emotional refilling. And so that pause that I've been talking about is really an opportunity for you to think about, well, what is it that I really need right now? And in the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of racial injustice, in the midst for our students not really being able to take care of the things outside of them, that pause allows you to kind of go back in. The next thing is play. And I smile about when I talk about play because play gets a bad rep because we don't think we have time for it, or I'll quiz you. How much play do you think you should get in a day?
So the challenge is my brain is saying that's completely unproductive.
Okay. Your brain feels that play is unproductive. Okay.
Yeah, so I don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to tell you that your brain actually needs moments of play, that's a human need, that it actually, we go back to this idea of trauma that we've been experiencing. Well, and I can tell you, maybe you'll connect with, instead of play, maybe you'll connect when we talk about Black boy joy, or we talk about joy. When we look back to the civil rights movement of old, so to speak, one of my favorite quotes is from Audre Lorde, and she talks about self-care being radical and it not being self-indulgent. But there's also this idea that, just the activist and the mental health activist in me that's going to come out. Our bodies are sacred, and other people are not wanting us to live, right? Joy is a human need. It is a joy, and play we are often dehumanized in our lived experience. And so we fought so hard for education, and we fought so hard, for physical safety. But one of the human rights that we have also is to have joy and to play. And that allows us to think more clearly, to be more productive. So I'm going to bring it back to you because I know you want to be productive. If you give yourself these moments of joy and play, they will allow you to be more productive. And they will also allow you to heal. If I said we've been in all this trauma, we can't, without the healing that has to take place, you will get fatigued, you will get burnt out. And then what we run the risk of is shutting down. So play combats that. Joy allows the lives that we've been fighting so hard for, the education that we want to, for our students, we're wanting you to have those experiences. If you don't get joy, then again, your total human experience, your total sense of well-being has not been fulfilled. So play is my second P that I give.
Well, I'll have to work on that one.
Yeah.
Now, I will say, as you're talking, I'm thinking and relating what you're saying to me. And I know that there have been days I've been very productive, but like every 2 hours, I play this game called Lily's Garden on my phone.
Okay.
And it's just like random. And I was like, I need to do something else for a minute. It keeps my brain active, but I enjoy it. And I just never thought about that being a positive component to my workday. But now that I reflect back on those days where I've done that like every hour and a half or every 2 hours, I have worked longer, but I haven't been fatigued at all at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I just never thought about it.
So I know in terms of our time together today, you're wanting to really think about how this applies to our students, how it and oftentimes, again, in the midst of everything we've been going through, things have been out of our control. What I really want to emphasize today is that everything I'm saying, these are things that are in our control. You getting up and for play, sometimes I talk about like just dancing around the house. You dancing around your room for a few seconds, clearing your head so that you can sit back down to be engaged in whatever whether it's remote learning. Those are things that don't cost any money, and that nobody else, we don't have to get permission from anyone else to do it. A lot of what we've been experiencing has been what other people. I did a Instagram live the other day, right before the election, and I talked about showing up and just doing your best, because there are so many things outside of our control right now, that everything we're talking about today for our students and for any administrators that are watching, these are things that you don't need permission from whoever our next president is, or we know we have a president-elect, but all of that stress that continues to be with that, you don't need permission from anyone else to begin to be compassionate towards yourself and to love yourself. And that, in fact, that is your way that you are combating all of the really difficult things that have been happening around us.
And, when having been over student affairs, in a normal situation where our students are on our campus and all, that is kind of built into their success.
Yes.
We don't think of it that way, but that's built into their success. So that interaction, they could be studying and a friend would come up and they'll sit down there and just start having a conversation that has nothing to do with it. It's kind of built into the process. So I'm glad that you're addressing this, because I know right now, and I have some mentees across the country, they're like, all I do is just sit in these classes all day. And many of them are nowhere near their peer support group. Yeah. So I'm glad that you just mentioned sometimes getting up and just doing something that has nothing to do with anything.
But it does. We've got to see it that this is, and I talk about intentionality. If we continue to think about it like as in, oh yeah, I did that thing, and looking back on it, it was kind of working. No, I'm encouraging you to put the intentionality before it, to say that this is what will help me to be my best self. Not, wow, yeah, yesterday was kind of like in retrospect. We're going to be proactive. This is preventative care. A lot of times in our culture, we're looking in crisis management. And if you think about that as administrators, right, we're trying to put fires out. What I really am encouraging us to do is to think from a wellness perspective and a proactive, preventative place. Because these types of things that we will move through this pandemic. We will create the new norm. We will move to another level of engagement around racial injustices. But those life stressors will continue to come. And when they continue to come, with each of those things, it can either denigrate or kind of take us down in terms of our total well-being, or what we can do, again, is get ahead of it. And so that's what I'm hopeful that everybody's getting from what I'm saying.
And I think it's good. I mean, I never thought about being proactive with it and really kind of incorporating it into my normal day as something else that I need to do.
Yep, it's an integration model versus an add-on. Really, it's about, so in my field, sometimes everybody's wondering or coming to me, students included, well, how do I get more balance, Dr. Lundy? How do I balance it all? So much to juggle. And I'm thinking, well, you can. Balance is a goal that we want to work towards, but truthfully, we also want to be working towards integration, work-life integration, integrating fun into our day. When I asked, so it was a trick question when I said how much play should be integrated throughout your day. You maybe can't like quantify it, but throughout your day, you should, if for our students, so my students who you're on social media, take a break from maybe your norm to look at something funny. Go to a page of someone who's engaged in making you laugh. Just that break, again, if I get all scientific on you, it increases your executive functioning and it helps your brain to operate better.
I'm over here taking notes, so when you see me looking down, that's exactly what I'm doing. And then your third P.
Say that again.
And then the third P was.
The third P is this one you'll love because of your need to be productive. It's prepare and plan. Once you have calmed your central nervous system, your executive functioning has improved. Once you've engaged in play, which is kind of healing, that's a motivative place. Um, with all that's happening, again, we're trying to figure out what's in our control and what's not in our control. So we want you to look at what's around you. So for my students, we're nearing the end of the semester, or we're in finals time. After you've done those first two P's, then get yourself organized. This isn't so anxiety tells us that there's some future negative outcome that's going to happen, and we get all worked up. With this prepare and plan, I'm asking you to not look so much about what the future holds, like what what will my campus look like? Will my friends come back? Kind of those lists of worries. I'm not telling you to do that. What I'm saying is, let's look around and let's plan and organize what's right in front of us. So if you have 5 classes that you're taking, I need you to look at your day, look to see when you're going to integrate play, look to see when you're going to make sure you breathe, and look to see how many hours you can spend and devote to taking care of the things on your to-do list. Getting organized is one of the best ways, again, to reduce anxiety. And I'm really focusing on anxiety because that's just been the pervasive message that many of our students have had. And so really wanting you to, with that last P, it's really kind of simple, but it helps you to be productive, which is a P that I know you like as well. And our students, you feel better, you have a greater sense of efficacy when you get things done, when you check it off your to-do list. So that will help combat. All of this has been about combating as we move through the pandemic, and each day is uncertain. And where I am, in Texas, with having the greatest number of COVID-19 cases, hospitalizations, it sometimes can feel that there's nothing that's getting better. But when you focus on these P's, as I've talked about them, when you can pause to reflect and say, what is it that I need in this moment, and how can I reconnect to my center? When you engage in some form of play, and that it can be your favorite song, it can be your favorite book. I'm a nerd. You talk about being an introvert. I'm an introvert and a nerd. I love listening to audiobooks. So if I just pause and listen to an audiobook, that's my play for a bit, right? And then I get back to it, and then I look at, okay, how do I structure and create structure? When the rest of the world is chaotic, there's chaos, I'm creating structure, and it calms me and it helps me to move forward with motivation.
And anxiety is real. And when we started going out in Georgia again, I remember the first 3 times I went to Walmart, I started sweating, and I was about to have a full-fledged panic attack. And I was like, what is going on here? This is just Walmart. But like you said, in my head, I had thought about all the things could go wrong with me going to Walmart. I was going to catch COVID, and I was in the hospital on a respirator. And all these things, none of which has happened.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I had just created something else. And so
think about that last P. What could you have done? So if it isn't about anticipating a negative outcome, let's think about the P about prepare and plan. So how could you prepare and plan when you think about going to the grocery store? Really, I'm asking you, what could you think about? As opposed to anticipating your negative health outcomes, what's within your control? Well, am I going to get my mask on? Right? Got my mask on. Well, how many items do I need to get in the store? Go ahead and get your list together. What store do I want to go? What route do I want to take? Those sound simple, but being intentional about that lets your focus be on that versus the negative outcome.
And I'm glad you mentioned, I have started creating lists when I go, and I get myself my list. I know the layout of my store. And the last couple of times, I haven't had any kind of reaction at all. And so that preparing and planning does help. Yeah. So we have students that are preparing potentially to come back on campuses in January.
Yes.
I have talked to 2 of my mentees, and they're fighting with their parents because their parents don't want them to go back. But the school is saying that you have to come back, and then they're having their own anxiety about one of them was very specific. He was like, if I get sick, how do I get care if I'm on the campus?
Yeah.
And I mean, there are just a lot of things. So what are some of your thoughts on assisting, our students with preparing for that? Because a lot of them probably won't think about that the entire month of December when you have no access to real services for many of them.
Well, what I would say is that perhaps there are some services, one, that they may not be aware of and that we want to encourage them to engage with. I know at Wiley, where we're a small institution, we are launching teletherapy services so that they do have services in the interim, in the break. Also, when our reopening plan came out this week, what was really important, I've talked to several students who had some anxiety about it. And what we did was either I encouraged them to read it, because some of the questions and the anxiety they had were in the reopening plan, or we read it together. So if I go to your mentee, if you get sick, well, before we even get to sick, let's talk about that last P, prepare and plan. The institutions, our HBCUs, we've been working hard to prepare and plan. So we have rapid testing that will occur. We have testing that will happen before. We have protective PPE that students will be given, thermometers. We have isolation and quarantine areas. We have, and these are from institutions. If we think about financial resources, our financial resources vary at our institutions, right? At our HBCUs. But what I will tell you is that if we are reopened, and I can say at Wiley, we have thought through sanitation. We have thought through the social distancing or physical distancing components. We have thought through, just all of the things that we will want to do in terms of suggestive. So we're also getting a telehealth service. In addition to having a physical, a nurse practitioner on campus, students will have on their phones access to be able to talk to a doctor who can prescribe medication 24/7. They have access to that service, in addition to having someone on campus who will be able to kind of assess their symptoms. So getting sick, we don't want you to get sick. So we've been thinking about it and planning it too. What would help this last P, actually, I'm glad it kind of goes right into your question. For any of your mentees and any students, what we want to do is make sure that you are reading all of the information that's been given to you, and that you are prepared and informed in that way. Because when we have information, when we have clear and direct information, it can reduce our anxiety. Now, sometimes the information ain't clear. So what I'm going to say is, in that regard, I encourage people to be self-advocates. We need to call our institutions and say, well, what happens if I get sick? And then if the information wasn't clear, and if you speak to someone, then I think as an administrator, it's my responsibility to make sure you understand. And I commit to my students, like, if I don't have an answer to a question, we're going to figure it out together. And I know, and I believe in our institutions, that our HBCUs, we talk a lot about customer service. I think about Jeffrey Pierce, one of our peers, one of our helpers. He talks about customer service. And I think right now, more than ever, we need to know that it's okay to have questions. It's okay to have anxiety. So anything you come to me with, I'm going to say, that's not a stupid question. Let's figure it out together, and let's think this through. Because health anxiety, there is an actual diagnosis for health anxiety in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that psychologists use. And health anxiety, fear around your physical health safety, is real. So I don't minimize that. So any question a student has about what happens if I'm going to get sick, we take it seriously. And again, though, we look at some clear information about what will happen. If someone gets COVID there are various policies that HBCUs have, but most likely, if someone gets sick, they will be isolated so that other people don't get sick. They will be given the direct medical care and support, and contact with primary care physicians, and they will quarantine for 14 days. In that 14 days, someone will check on them. They will, make sure they get the food that they need, and then their health will be reassessed. And so the safety of the entire campus is taken in terms of the isolation, but the student safety will be taken in regard as well, to make sure that they're cared for each day in that quarantine. So that's broadly which would likely happen to any student who would get sick on campus as it relates to COVID-19. And as it relates to getting sick in other ways, then our institutions have health services. They have mental health care, all of those things that you typically would get. It is our responsibility, our ethical responsibility, that you still have access to all those same things you had, even if campus looks a little different, even if you're in a hybrid situation. In terms of some campuses are having students come back, and if you have a Monday, Wednesday class, for example, you might not physically go to class on Monday. You may be in your room virtually going to class, and it might be that then on Wednesday you go to class. But again, I can't speak for all HBCUs. We've got to clearly read to see what is your particular institution doing. And then as administrators, I'm encouraging us to just amplify customer service, because everybody has questions, and that's okay. And we should support our students and support one another by working through any kind of discomfort or questions that we have and finding the answer as best we can.
So I want to shift the conversation for a moment. There's a cultural issue here, but there's also some issues around your peers thinking certain things. I want to talk about the stigma that goes with, mental health services. When I was growing up, everything was supposed to be fine. What stays in the house, what happens in the house stays in the house. You don't talk to anybody about your business. I don't think that that's healthy as I've gotten older. I tell people all the time, I told somebody yesterday, like, my therapist has a therapist. I also am in ministry, and now ministers are starting to realize you have to have someone that you can release some of that toxicity with. So let's discuss briefly, how do we as administrators and how do our students start getting past this stigma where, I must be crazy if I think I need to talk to someone. I don't think people are crazy. We all have moments where we need assistance.
Yeah, it's a great question. I usually start by reminding or informing everyone that regardless if you want to talk about it or not, everyone has mental health. Just like you have physical health, everybody has a level of mental health. And so this idea that somehow by not talking about it, we are, it's not an issue, is not, that's a misnomer. So everybody has a level of mental health. I think another thing that's really helpful for us to combat the stigma is to do exactly what we're doing today, which is talk about it. Stigma remains, we remain uncomfortable with things that we don't understand and that we don't connect with. So the more we're able to have conversations like this, where we're saying it's okay to not be okay, then we're giving each other permission. So we do this thing, vulnerability is like a bad word. It's like a curse word, right? People don't want to be vulnerable because the idea is that somehow vulnerability is weakness, when in fact, to be vulnerable takes a lot of strength. Yes, you'd go to a cardiologist if something happens to your heart. So why not a therapist for your mental health? And I love that statement because it speaks to the fact that we've normalized that it's okay to have something going on with your physical body. And I guess a way that we could kind of bridge that gap is to say that your mental and your physical are connected. So we talked a lot today about anxiety. Have you ever had just your stomach was in knots? You couldn't really hold anything down. A lot of times there's nothing wrong with your stomach. It's your emotional health. So often if I'm talking to someone who's not quite comfortable getting deep with me and telling me what's going on emotionally, we start with the physical. And we can transition from the physical to then think about like, what was going on? And once we're able to shift from the physical and what maybe was mental that was contributing to it, a lot of times people, when they can see that their physical symptoms subside, when they can make that connection between their physical and their mental, then they're more likely to say, okay, well, maybe this thing is not so bad. I think we've also got to get past the superwoman complex and the idea that men don't cry or that men don't show their emotions. I had a conversation with someone recently, and I'm not going to say their name. They are in a higher education in HBCUs, and they told me that a real man knows that crying doesn't solve anything, or talking about your emotions doesn't solve anything. And so I'm going to challenge, I'm going to say where we can move past the stigma. First, we've got to start with us as administrators, because I thought to myself, if this is a male administrator at an HBCU, what is that then saying to his students who he's working with? If we don't give ourselves permission to take care of ourselves, our students, we're modeling it for them, right? They listen to what we're saying. They listen to what we're not saying, right? They observe and soak up everything. So the fact that one of the things I talked about, vulnerability being a bad word, one of the things I do off rip is I tell my story. And my story is one where I was clinically depressed. I have had experiences of attempting to take my own life. And when people look at you though, and they see where you are, they were like, "What? You? No." And when I let that veil off and I'm vulnerable, and people still see that my life is rich and full, then it gives other people permission to do the same thing. So we got to talk about it. We got to be aware that everybody has it. Got to get away from the superwoman, Superman complex that we have. And we've got to get past some of the gender norms that we place on ourselves that says men and women should or shouldn't or can't do certain things. Those are some of the initial things that I would say.
I know when I was at Payne, counseling and wellness reported to my office, and they had started to do some new things where students who had individual sessions could bring their peer network in if they wanted to start discussing how they could collectively help the person.
Yep.
And I was so surprised with how many students' friends wanted to come in and help them. You always think like nobody's going to come, but we can offer this service.
No.
But then some of those other people then started applying for services themselves.
Yeah.
They're like, well, this is useful. I need to talk to somebody too.
So you're bringing up a great point. So peer education and peer counseling and support is significant. It's a significant way that we break down that barrier. What research indicates is that students want to hear from other students about it. So I can tap dance all day. My vulnerability helps. It gets maybe a little piece of the puzzle. But what I found is that we have wellness ambassadors at Wiley, and the wellness ambassadors are the ones who are going forward and sharing their personal experiences. So the Let's Talk About It supports, it's a student-led support group that we have on Thursdays. And actually I had a great conversation with Dr. Deems, Pernella Deems at Kentucky State. Her students were doing something similar to this. And Wiley students, they took it and they every Wednesday after Wellness Wednesday, our SGA president would go live on Instagram, and he would talk about, as one of our wellness ambassadors, he would talk about our Let's Talk About It safe spaces on Thursday, and they will be openly and vulnerably talking about their emotional needs. And so seeing that from our SGA president, I think hands down, we saw an increase in our attendance in Let's Talk About It. I saw an increase in my individual counseling sessions with students reaching out to me, emailing me. So it says a lot if our student leaders can be on board with that, if they truly believe and have a heart for making sure that everybody's okay, themselves included, and talking about it, then that breaks down barriers as well. So it starts with conversation, but it also starts with that, kind of an extension of that is the peer education and peer mental health support.
It's so funny, before I went into higher ed, I worked in the nonprofit sector, and most of that was with non-Black community.
Okay.
And it was just always interesting me with my other colleagues that was never an issue. They're like, "Oh, I'm going to my therapist," or my therapist just described such and such and such and such. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, why are they talking to people about this?
And now, but we've got it. So that's something I'm telling you, we got to check that.
Right.
That you were like, why are they saying? Here's the thing. They don't see it as a luxury. They also don't see it as an indictment on something being wrong. It's a part of their wellness care kit. And we, for so long, haven't had the opportunity to think about what is it that I need to be well, other than we think about church, or we've culturally thought about church. Like if I don't go to church, or if I'm not, for many people. But this is just an extension of your total sense of well-being to talk about, or I do need to add, to talk about with someone who feels safe. So I talk often about safe and brave spaces. We're not saying, you and I aren't saying, we aren't promoting that everyone tell everything to everybody that you see. Part of emotional intelligence is that we know when, where, and with whom to express. And as we develop, we can begin to recognize what spaces and places feel safe. And I hope, as people, if they have any questions, that, that this has been the safe space today. This has been a space where you have really allowed me to be vulnerable for a moment. Someone I hear, I pray and see my therapist. Absolutely, they go hand in hand. And so I hope that we can just continue to shift the narrative. And I know you said today is the first of several conversations that you're going to have. And I think you're doing the work, and your mentees or whatever other students, if they can pick up on it too, then they will help their peers.
And the good thing about my show is that we have, we track data because I'm a data person. And it's amazing to me and my team how many people share these videos afterwards. And then, one episode had like 5,000 views. It happened like over the next 3 or 4 days. And so, I think it's important that we help people understand that, sometimes transparency helps. Like, I'm very open about the fact that I have 2 terminal illnesses, and I would share that with my students when they were going through health challenges and a lot of things I'm dealing with. One student was diagnosed with cancer, and that was like the end of the world. And I was like, well, and I had to help that student through that process because, don't, like you said earlier, we don't always want to jump to 25 years in the future.
Yeah.
So just we'll deal with today and tomorrow. And so I think that that's very important as we just try to break down some of these walls, because we are not just dealing with the current issues, but we're dealing with generational trauma.
Yep.
Like, I have conversations with my mother who has very staunch beliefs about certain communities.
Yeah.
Which is not just her, but that's like her mother and her grandmother's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to consciously be like, okay, well, that's not my thinking, and not take on other people's belief systems as I continue my work. So I think that that's very critical. I mean, we have a lot of work to do, and I think our students and faculty, staff, and administrators, all of us should be in some way balancing our mental health.
Yeah. And you talk about generational trauma, though, I think that that's actually a part of the stigma, or the difficulty in fighting the stigma. Because if we think about care for Black folks, if you think about the Tuskegee experiment, if you think about in my field of mental health, the diagnoses, and so Black folks are disproportionately diagnosed with schizophrenia because the way in which these disorders were normed was not based on our cultural need and our lived experiences. So sometimes things that look like atypical or bizarre behavior is really us being expressive. And instead, it's been deemed as pathological. So that experience, we've experienced it as real. So being distrustful of services is, I want to normalize that us having the stigma isn't necessarily, it was rightfully developed initially because folks didn't want us to be well. And again, that's this idea of wellness. We reclaim it for ourselves. So Black psychologists and competent therapy, when we talk about, again, who do you speak to? You want to speak to someone who is safe, someone who can understand your experience. So not everybody is going to be who you want to open up with and share. And so mental health stigma, although we do want to combat it because we are deserving of and in need of processing our mental health, at the same time, it's important to make informed decisions about where we're seeking support, and knowing that, for some time, it was not always safe for us to share. So this idea of not opening up, we think back, if we even go back, so a lot of times people say, oh, why do you go back to slavery? Well, if you go back to slavery, saying that you weren't okay could get you killed, right? You could get lashed or so this idea of not being okay is deeply rooted in our history of trauma, but we're in spaces now where we can reclaim and redefine and affirm for ourselves what are the things we need to be well. So having all of the knowledge is important, but not being stuck in the stigma that was rightfully developed initially, but now we're moving in a different space.
And I think, I often reference the slave period as well, in that so much was done to us physically and we had no option of responding.
Yes.
So, people would see their parents murdered, or families would be completely separated. And because of the laws at the time, we had no option to combat those situations. And I think, I think now when I just interact with some of the older members of my family and how some of their thinking is still rooted with many of those beliefs, because I mean, if we really think about it, we're not really that far removed.
We're not. And this year, 2020, has reminded us in a lot of ways how we're not really as far removed. But what I have loved, I mean, even if you think about celebrities, right? Taraji P. Henson is one that I
Yes.
admire in terms of her ability to talk openly about mental health. Even what Charlemagne the God, if we think about his work that he's been doing, to really advocate for mental health. So when those people that we're kind of looking to and we look at their lives as having it all together or somehow, and they're coming out and saying, no, I talk to my therapist every week. Yep. Which I talk to my therapist every week. So I'm saying
I realized years ago, being in ministry and counseling people all the time, and then even going into higher ed administration, you soak in all of that stuff. And there was a point in my life where I was just like, why am I so angry and bitter? That's not my person. And I realized it because I was taking in all of everybody else's stuff.
Yeah.
I wasn't releasing any of it anywhere. And I just started having, like, it was really bad. And, it took me to a place where, I had to go on meds and all kinds of things.
Okay. Yeah. And again, thank you for your vulnerability. But I just realized as we were talking, we've been talking earlier about how the pandemic impacted some of our students financially. We should say that in college, that's probably one of the few times in life where you can get mental health care at no additional cost. So I want to put that out there. You are paying your institution. You need to get from your institution what you're paying for. So any student who is in distress, you should be mental health care is a right that you have and a privilege that you have as a student of that institution. So you need to get that mental health care. Like I said, Wiley College students are going to be getting the mental health app on their phones for 24/7 service, but then they still have access to me, the licensed clinical psychologist. Every institution of higher ed that is accredited or working on their credit, anyway, they have to have a mental health provider or access to that, and they have to have health care. And it is going to be the time in your life where you're getting it at a cost that is reduced or to no cost, and it should be to no cost.
And I mean, I hate to say, so I went to Morehouse and I was there a little longer than I needed to be. Okay. But in my last year, my dad died. That was the first time I realized we had a counseling center because my godfather, who directs the Glee Club, Dr. Morrow, made me go to the counseling center. And I was like, when did we get a counseling center?
Yeah, it's been there the whole time.
And I had never utilized any of the services, and there were things that I had gone through that those services could have helped. And then it was off in this corner somewhere, like you would never pass it and see, oh, what is this?
Yes. I think that's one of the things I really wanted to talk about that the pandemic has allowed for us to kind of get away from some of those barriers. Because I went to Xavier University and I was a psychology major and I didn't know where the counseling center was until my junior or senior year. And it was in the middle of, like, it was off in this little house that was kind of rickety. That you don't really want to go if it doesn't look like a safe or comfortable space. So what has happened in the pandemic is it's kind of challenged people in my field for us to be more visible or to say, we are here. We know you need us. Come. And just making ourselves available and more visible and almost, and I use this word sexy in a, not in the sense of like actual sex, but it's become a sexy thing to talk about. And while it has been that way, I think as mental health providers, it's our duty to go for it and to acknowledge that yes, people are talking about it now. So now it's time for us to step our games up and to provide the competent care that our communities need. And HBCUs, we have an opportunity to, again, I've talked today about reclamation. We have an opportunity. I remember, I'll tell you this, and this is what I mean by opportunity. I went to the University of Notre Dame for my PhD, and I worked at UNC Chapel Hill for my first job. And I can say in both of those spaces, how I provided care to my students when I was counseling them was much different than it looked like for my counterparts. And I used to feel a little self-conscious about it because like all the Black students would come to me. Even some of the Latino students would come to me, right? Like there was this cultural connection, and I would feel, but I realized just like with everything else, we do things differently, and that's okay. So I think it's HBCUs, how we provide ethical, confidential care, though, it's going to look a little different, and we need to be okay with that. I remember being at Carolina, UNC Chapel Hill, and I would go to classes and volunteer to lecture, or I would sit in the cafeteria, or I would be connecting with the students at their after hours. Most of the psychologists just stayed in the counseling center. They never got out. I think it's our duty and our job to connect with our culture and our community. And in doing that, you create relationships. Really, a lot of this is, we didn't use this word today, but this has been about relationships. You're a therapist, it's a different kind of relationship, but relationships make you feel safe, and you know you can trust the person. So I'm out and about connecting, creating relationships, so that if something does happen, my students aren't saying, oh, Dr. Lundy, I'm going to make a therapy appointment with her. They're saying, that's that lady. She talked to me for a few seconds when I was walking from the CAF down to Pemberton. And they don't even it's not even about it being therapy. It's about, wow, this is someone who cares about me, and this is a safe space. I'm going to go, and maybe she can give me a little support.
And I think too, as administrators and faculty and staff, sometimes we don't realize, like you said earlier, our students are watching us. And when they see you out doing things outside your office, that also says that you care about them as individuals and not just as a student. And I think that's one of the benefits of HBCUs. Even when I was in school, Dr. Massey was our president. He walked from his house to his office every day. He would play tennis with students. So when he came up to talk to you about stuff, you always felt like, okay, it's good. I can talk to him.
Yep.
It made it a tangible experience, and I think that's very important.
And when we think about
I do have some issues with schools that throw the counseling center off and then don't allow that staff the opportunity to engage with the student body.
Yeah, so I think administration and stakeholders have to be convinced that mental health matters as well. But in terms of making sure that the students know that it's there, I think it's a dual responsibility. It's a relationship we're building, and we have to always acknowledge in the middle of the pandemic that it's going to look different. So if I'm talking about getting out and getting engaged, that's going to look different right now in the midst of the pandemic. I never used to accept friends, so ethically, I would never accept friend requests on social media from my students. Well, I've had to create some different boundaries. Because now I get to see, if I have a student that's in California, sometimes the only way I know that they maybe aren't doing so well, and the way I can meet them is if they post a status that's like, I'm out of it today. So I have to tread lightly, and check in and establish a sense of connection, but that is also respectful of their boundaries. But I've had to shift a rule that I had for myself, because that was the way I engaged in self-care. But now my students aren't on campus. They can't watch me go to the CAF. So now all they're doing is watching my Insta story. So I make sure that everything I'm posting on Insta story is some wellness strategy. I'm posting IG lives talking about how you take care of yourself. I do things in three. So I have the 3 M's. Mindset, movement, and motivation. So that's another one, right? So you wake up in the morning and you get your mindset together. Your mindset gets together by, some people for prayer, but movement helps. Movement is, it's going to get your endorphins up. It's going to get your oxytocin levels together. And then you find the thing that motivates you. So I do my 3 M's, putting all that on Instagram because my kids can't follow me, right? They literally can't follow. They don't see me in chapel. They don't see me around campus. So I know if the students are following me, then I want to make sure if they're looking at my Insta story or the things that I post, that it's giving them some of that wellness care.
Now, what were those 3 M's again?
Mindset, movement, and motivation.
I tell you, I'm over here taking notes. So that's always a good sign.
If you follow me, the Self-Care Doc, on Instagram, and in my highlights in my stories, I have some of these key things that we've been talking about today. And it's so interesting. So I'm aware of our conversation today, and I realize like I'm just so smiley. I'm smiling a lot because I get excited to talk about this, and I think that that's my way of trying to help us with the destigmatization and it being such a heavy topic. I think a lot of times people think when you're talking about mental health, it's going to be, it's going to be so solemn. And the reality is, again, everybody has this. I get excited to talk about it because part of the way we lift the stigma is that we see that I can have moments. So if you go to my Instagram, I can have moments where I have a recent post where I was in tears as I was talking. But that didn't mean I was staying sad. We get to hold multiple emotions. We are in the middle of a time that's like none other that we've experienced. So if you have a moment that's sad, that's okay. You don't have to stay there. You have moments like this where I get to engage in conversations with my colleagues and I get to smile and think about just how of a impact I can make in the world. So I guess what I want to give everybody permission to do is to have the range of emotions that you're gonna have. Because when you relieve yourself of that pressure, then you don't get stuck there. You get to experience the sadness and then you move through it. And moving through it is how we build our strength. And that's what's strong. It's not weak to cry or to be vulnerable. We gain our strength in those moments when we are able to move through.
And I think, you just brought something to my mind. I was thinking about it. It was also good when I would have conversations with students and they'd be having challenges. And then they'd come back and tell me, that similar thing happened, but this time I approached it different. It helps you understand that they're listening, one, but that they are starting to learn how to be mentally healthy.
Yep. It's not
Um,
about depending on us. So they model us or they see us, but it really is about them claiming for themselves their own strategies. And I call it a toolkit. They get their own toolkit of things. So sometimes students and we come up with their playlists, right? So music changes our mood. So we're talking about you had your moment where you couldn't focus or you were anxious and sad. Well, we get our happy playlist, your playlist that gets you together. And then once they get their toolkit or they get their own playlist, they can come to me, like you said, and tell me how they did something different, how they grew, how things are going better. And then we work on whatever next challenge might come up. And then we the process is the same. They go, they practice it, they integrate it into their life. That kind of come full circle of what we talked about earlier, this integration. So that we have the conversation, we learn some strategies, you integrate it, and then you move on to the next.
and my early degrees are in music, and there's a lot of research on people listen to music that coincides their current mood.
Yes, and instead you want to do the opposite action. Yep.
I always tell my students, if you feel like you are sad right now, why are you listening to
Why
that?
are we listening? I have so many students when they're having relationship issues. I mean, they are listening to the saddest songs, and we're like, no, we want to listen to the songs that are about life and affirming and your joy, right? Not they left me. I'm never gonna.
Right, I'll never find anybody ever
Yes.
again. I'll be single the rest of my life.
Yeah, and when they learn that small little shift, they come back in and they tell me, "Oh yeah, I got my playlist." I have one student. We work on affirmations. This is a key thing. Our thoughts impact our feelings, impact our behaviors. If we can get these thoughts together, so affirmations is a real key thing. And I have one student. They really need to write a book. I'm empowering them and encouraging them because the affirmations that they provide are they help me at the end. So what we have done is at the end of each of their sessions, we let them develop a new affirmation, and that affirmation is the one that guides them through the week. So just like the music, affirming life-giving experiences that are in opposite. So again, they may be feeling sad. So then we come up with an affirmation that says, although I'm sad now, I affirm that I am, and then they fill in the blank. I affirm that I am. Yes, yes, CBT. Yes, that's somebody said that I was talking about thoughts, feelings, and behavior. CBT. Mm-hmm.
So, what are some other things you'd like to discuss and share today?
I have one thing that I want to share that I think is going to connect with what I said about joy. And then for me, it's been the unexpected things that have come up in the midst of COVID, because we talk about the sad things, we talk about the things that we've lost. And because of the pandemic, racial injustice, all these things have been a disruption of our norm, and they've kind of created chaos. But I want to say that this experience has taught us some things. And one of those things has been, you talked about being an introvert earlier. I think this has taught us to communicate in different ways. I'm going to give you this example for K through 12. I've done some work recently with K through 12 educators. And what they're finding in K through 12 is some people who used to either be bullies, some young folks who used to either be bullies or get bullied or not talk in class, or kind of, they've noticed behavioral changes. They've noticed that students who were really, really quiet are now opening up and being able to communicate in different ways. They're thriving. They've also noticed that some people, so in terms of our accommodations, right, we are having to accommodate in ways that we never did. So you got closed captioning. What the interesting thing that I want to give us is that as difficult as this has been, what are some areas that you might have seen as deficits? So if I think about my K through 12 students, the student who used to be in the back and maybe not feel like they could talk, and now on their virtual learning, they're talking, they're typing in the comments section, they're thriving. For each of us, there's probably something that we thought of for ourselves as deficit, that this experience can help us to grow and stretch in some way, just like our young folks are doing. And I would encourage us all to say, what way? And I can give an example for me. I was petrified, that's probably a good word, of going on Instagram Live. And I always wanted to share some of the strategies, but every Wednesday I have done Wellness Wednesday, and I did it because it was for my students. And I realize now that I've developed a skill and a way of engaging that I was uncomfortable with. And now I've stepped out of my comfort zone, and I've been able to provide something. I was surprised. I was on a panel with the president of Houston Tillotson, and I was surprised that she watched a Wellness Wednesday, and she talked about it being something that she thought might be helpful for Houston Tillotson. And I said to myself, well, look at that. Here I am nervous about something. And so I think about our students and anyone watching, where you have seen yourself maybe fall short, feeling like you fell short, or you had a sense of self-doubt. This is a place where we can shift and be creative in ways that we never thought. And it can be a way to regain our power and our sense of control in a time that has told us that we don't have any. And I want to affirm that we actually can grow. So that's a thing that hasn't come up, because we talked about a lot of the negative things and the things that were taken away. But I really wanted us to say, to be self-reflective about, and I want us all to be proud of ourselves for whatever that thing has been, because it's going to look different for everybody. And so for some of us, it could be, I never used to make my bed up. I know that sounds silly and small, but when you're in a space where you're in your home a lot more, and your environment matters so much, it could be something as small as that you've grown in, and that you can be proud of yourself for. Because internalizing that sense of pride or self-efficacy, again, all of the things that I'm telling you, doing that is going to help your mood improve. So I think that
I did not like seeing myself on recordings.
Yeah, look at this.
And I would never, and yes. I did one live like last year, and I was a wreck.
I had never done one, except I had never done a live. I recorded a video at the beginning of 2020. I recorded it, and I edited it, and then I put it on my highlights. Now I'm like, go live.
Right.
Because, this fear of judgment, this fear of people, there's a lot. I mean, fear underlies a lot of either why we do or don't do something. Fear is a control factor. When we think about, we talk about the election and all of those commercials we might have seen, fear can stifle us if we let it. But what this pandemic has shown us is that, okay, there's a whole bunch of fear everywhere. And if the fear overtakes me, then I may get stuck and I may not do anything. So the way in my field we address fear is that you face it head on and you habituate to the fear. And that's what we've all had to do.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some positive things. I am an advocate that we really need to change the manner in which education is presented
Okay.
because, I can't sit through these 2 and 3 hour lectures. And so clearly our students aren't. And I
Nope.
think that this pandemic has forced education to move forward.
Oh,
Now, my
yeah.
concern is that so many people talking about when we go back to the way we were. Well, that's never going to happen because you can't take all of education virtual. The students have now come to a different concept of learning and then revert back to a system that was developed in the 20s. Like,
Yeah.
we're not going back. I think one of the positives that I have consistently discussed on all of my shows is that this has forced education to move forward. Even those older faculty members at colleges who would never do anything technological.
Yeah.
I talked to my aunt the other day. I mean, she's like 70. She's like, yeah, I did Zoom. She's like, I kept hanging up on the people, but we're getting better.
I'm gonna tell you a secret. My mom is so my mom is an AKA, and actually today she's having her she's a golden soror. So my mom is 70 as well. So anyway, while we've been on this, I have had to help her get on Zoom. Like literally, I'm over here writing the Zoom information down for her, and so proud of her in that she has not missed a beat. She is in there now with her sorors on Zoom, and there has been the opportunity for the generational. I think what we're really speaking to is like there's been this connection between the generations and how we've all had to step out of our comfort zones. In a way, for us, really, it's been about connection. That was another point I was going to make is that we are wired for connection, and the pandemic shifted how we can connect. But it is when people feel seen, heard, and understood, then those are the moments of most genuine connection. And I didn't think that you could fully see, understand, and connect with someone just virtually. But I have had some of my most meaningful conversations virtually in a way. And I guess I had some stigma about it. Even in the mental health field, there was stigma around teletherapy. There was this sense that it wasn't as good. And in some ways, there are barriers and limitations, but I think this has shifted how therapy will be done moving forward.
And I mean, it's funny, you mentioned something earlier too, about having to shift some of your self-care mechanisms in terms of students on social media and things. I had this very staunch rule that no one could FaceTime or anything me without, texting me first and getting approval.
Yeah.
But people that I mentor or I'm educating or things, they can't just walk in here now.
Yeah.
So, their solution is that they just FaceTime and then I look up on my screen and I have a call come in. So I've made that adjustment where, okay, so let me answer these calls if I can.
Mm-hmm.
Because before I would just decline them all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I would have students in my Facebook friend request and then I realized like, okay, where are some other ways that I can set these boundaries? Because boundaries are still important. You still need to protect your time and your space. But if my experience or the situation has shifted, I have to shift and adjust too. And our ability and capacity to be flexible is also one of the key things we want to do to make sure that we can thrive and not just survive during this time.
So as we move into the final segment, I would just like to shift one more time and then we will become our close. But we are moving into the holiday season. Lots of families are not doing their normal things. They're not having these big Thanksgiving dinners. I had, somebody who wants me to mentor them who informed like their parents have lost their jobs because of COVID. So they're not expecting like Christmas.
Yeah.
And this young lady was very down about that because like that's the time all her siblings come and they're not doing any of that. So what are a couple of things you can share with our students as they work to, maintain their mental wellness over these next few weeks in this holiday season?
Yeah. I think we've talked a lot about some of those things. I think the 3 Ps will be helpful, especially when you think about holidays tend to actually be a time of increased distress for people, even if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic. We have seasonal affective disorder that increases. We have, unfortunately, suicide. So it's a time where we are ideally most likely connected, but sometimes people can feel disconnected. So you want to create those opportunities to pause and reflect and get centered so you can see what you need. But you also want to go back to what we said about who are your safe people, places, and things that you can be vulnerable with during this time. So if you do find yourself feeling sad, go ahead and identify who that person, place, or thing will be. So when I say thing, it could be your journal, right? Over the holidays, increasing your time of journaling and being able to do that intentionally. That's a thing, a word I've used throughout our time today is intentionality. It could be a place. It could be over the holidays. You know, it's not going to be the same like it used to be, but you know what, y'all? You have that patio out back, and if you have like a little pit fire, go out there, be intentional about going out there, getting some time, maybe like spending time outside with your family. It could be a person. It could be your younger cousin that you normally see, that usually comes home for Christmas or for Thanksgiving. You know that you won't be able to see them in person, but you're intentional about Zooming with them this holiday season. I think our focus will probably have to shift if finances are concerned. We will want to shift from thinking about the things we're going to get. So what is it? I'm not a PlayStation person, but is it PlayStation 5 coming out or something like that? Everybody's excited about. We may not be able to get the PlayStation 5s this time around, or at least not right as it comes out, and allowing ourselves to essentially, I'm really gonna nail in this last point about gratitude. Gratitude during this time, and particularly with everything that has gone on this year, having a practice of gratitude is going to help us as we move into the holiday season. So like I said, you want to find your safe person, place, or thing, whether it's a place in your house, a person to connect with on Zoom, a thing to do, whether it's journaling, but gratitude, I'll end with that one. Gratitude has been shown to improve mood. And I want to note that none of these things I've said cost. Okay? Because a lot of times we try to feel how we try to fill ourselves and fill voids with even though I said a thing, I guess maybe a journal would cost and a pen would cost. But those are things that, we don't have to materialistically fill ourselves with. And gratitude is actually, if I think back to our Wellness Wednesday, our last Wellness Wednesday this year, we took several students. We had seniors who they were able to look back. I asked them to look back over their semester and to think about what were the things that they would be grateful for at the end of this time. And it was gratitude practice. Again, is something that's been shown to improve mood. And for anybody who's watching this, what I would encourage you to do is at the beginning of a day, you affirm your intentions, or you affirm for yourself what you are looking forward to in your day. And at the end of your day, you end with 3 things you're grateful for. So in the beginning of your day, 3 intentional things that you are affirming for yourself. And at the end of the day, 3 things that you're grateful for.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. If you stay on, I'll be right back with you. Do you have any final words?
I appreciate this. I'm excited to view the other mental health conversations. And if anyone would like to connect with me, if you're wanting to connect in the higher ed spectrum, Lundy at wileyc.edu. And then if you're wanting to engage with me on social media, the Self-Care Doc on IG and the selfcaredoc.com for my website.
Well, thank you so much for your time. If you stay on, I'll be right back with you. So thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. It was great. I learned a lot. I had taken a whole page of notes. Just a couple of things. We want to make sure that you donate to our scholarship fund. We're trying to raise these funds by the end of this year. So we want you to make sure that you contribute There are ways to do that via Cash App and on our website. And then finally, connect with us on social media. Connect with Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you will be with us in our next session. And finally, next week, we will have a series of shows on various topics that are lead up to my grant workshop that will be held on next Saturday. So we have a number of sessions next week. Look forward to seeing you all during our next episode of Dean Talk. Have a great weekend.